Welcome, Robert, to my YouTube channel. I met Robert through Facebook, and I was just telling him right now before we started recording that I have yet to interview anyone from the UK, and I love that he has a lot of wisdom and a lot of years. So I'm so excited to hear his story, which I have not heard yet. So we're just going to get into it. So Robert, if you can share with us how the Jehovah's Witnesses came into your life and then your story as a Jehovah's Witness. And I will hand the mic over to you.
Thank you. Well, it's good to be here with you and to share my story with you. My involvement with the Witnesses began way back when I was a youngster. My mother had been contacted by the Witnesses sometime during the time immediately following the Second World War, which was around the time when I was born. So we go back a bit. And I think Mother was probably convinced by them right from the start, but it wasn't until I was about 8 or so, my sister a little older, my younger sister had not come along at that time. It was around about that time when Mother began to take a serious interest, and every Thursday afternoon, straight from school, we'd have a home Bible study when one of the Witnesses would visit, and we'd go through the old book of that period, Let God Be True, which perhaps many current folk have not even heard of, let alone have read. But it was the basic doctrinal book of that period. And as a youngster of about 8, I was actually fascinated. I lapped it up. It was great stuff. It was fun. And I think the really interesting thing for me at that stage was the thought that events about to unfold in the present had, so we were told, been foretold in the Bible and in the book of Daniel. And Daniel remains one of my great interests in scriptural studies. And that's when it began, a long time ago. I sometimes say round about the time when Noah came out of the ark. Though maybe not quite that long ago. But yes, I became fascinated. And I was very keen to learn. As a youngster, I progressed. My father was drawn into it as well that time, and for just a short period, he was quite involved, and involved to the extent that he was giving talks on the on meetings, and giving talks on the midweek service meeting, and so on. But he didn't stick with it. He, as the current expression has it, he faded. He could see all sorts of problems with it and just sort of backed off. And when we moved house, he had a great excuse because a lot of work needed to be done, and Dad would he'd have jobs to do, work on the house to be doing, rather than attending meetings. So that was how he broke away from it. But by around that time, I was getting quite keen, and as a young teenager, I had my first stint as a pioneer, a vacation pioneer, at the age of 13. But what I most liked about being a pioneer, was getting the books at pioneer rate, which was a big discount. And there were two in particular that I really wanted. One was the emphatic diaglot, the Greek English interlinear translation of the New Testament. It was quite an expensive one. The prices of those days, 13 shillings and sixpence, as I recall. But at pioneer rate, I got it, for less than my week's pocket money. But that really is when the rot set in for me. I also bought the book, Equipped for Every Good Work. Another one folk won't have heard of, but it was one of the textbooks. It had a chapter on each of the books of the Bible, giving background information and all that sort of thing. This, I really, I loved it. I was very, very interested at that very early stage in biblical studies, and I progressed in the witnesses. At a young age, I was a group study conductor. I became a pioneer when I left school, and very soon was appointed special pioneer. And my partner and I, still teenagers, with a little while to go as teenagers, we went up to Scotland as pioneers, special pioneers. Up there I served as ministry school servant, ministry school overseer.
So I'm going to interrupt you for a second. So you mentioned your partner. So how old were you when you got married?
Oh, I meant my pioneer partner.
Ah, of course.
Sorry. Yes.
Question number 2, I wanted to ask you back then, how many hours were required a month for special pioneers?
Special pioneers, those of us who got the monthly allowance, we had to do 150 hours a month.
Wow. So no room for secular jobs, school, friends.
No.
All pioneering, all Jehovah in the service and the ministry and preaching to people. How long were you a special pioneer for?
Just over a year.
And then was this after you graduated from school?
Yes, it was. I left school, worked for a year in a super job, actually. I was a laboratory assistant in a cable manufacturing firm. Great work, but it was only temporary until I could start pioneering. So at 18, I became first a regular pioneer on 100 hours a month and working part-time flipping hamburgers in a hamburger restaurant. And then after a year of that, special pioneer in Scotland. And one of
how long were you a special pioneer for?
Just over a year.
Okay.
Yes.
So that brings you into your around 20 years old. And what was life like that back then for you?
Yes, I quit pioneering altogether just short of the age of 20. I'd continued to be very interested in studying, in reading outside of the Watchtower movement. And one of the first things I did when we got to Clydebank near Glasgow was to join the public library. And I would knock on a few doors, get my time started, and then go to the library while the clock's still ticking. And I read all sorts of stuff, particularly in psychology, in philosophy, and lots of novels, fiction. I loved it. And I just like to engage with ideas. I like to think, to work things out. And a very memorable but quite brief encounter I had as a pioneer was one that I mentioned in my book, Pathways to Freedom there. While out on the doing return visits and not at homes and that sort of thing, more time wasting than actually engaging with people. And I was with my girlfriend on that afternoon, actually, and near to the big church in Clydebank, we were at one door, and a chap came across from the other side of the road who turned out to be the minister of the church. And he asked them, who were we and what did we want? Because his friends at this house where we were knocking were away. And we started off in conversation with this Church of Scotland minister. And one of the things he asked me right at the beginning was, what did I think would be the main differences between the witnesses and the mainstream church? And me being a bit of a sharp and a smart ass, as the expression goes, thought, right, Trinity, I can handle this one. And I pitched into why John 1 verse 1 should not be translated the way that most Bibles have it. It should be translated, the word was a God, not the word was God. And this minister, lovely guy, with a smile on his face, he said, you know, you should learn New Testament Greek if you're going to do this job properly. Come along to me, I could help you. And, oh, wow. But of course, no way I could take him up on that. But I did get myself a book, Teach Yourself New Testament Greek, and I did make a start on learning New Testament Greek and using the old emphatic diaglot, which I had bought some years before as a kid. But what I didn't...
I was going to say, and you didn't feel that you were crossing a line when it came to looking at other kind of religious information that didn't have to do with Jehovah's Witnesses?
No, I can't recall that I did, although I do recall one guy who was very much on the edge of it when I refused to lift home from him because I wanted to enjoy the walk and think. He said, I'll be very careful about that. It will lead you astray. And at that time, I think my attitude was that I wanted to be well aware of all the arguments so that I could be the one who would, I would demolish all the arguments of the folk who opposed us. And it didn't work out that way, of course. It worked out the other way. I became tired of Pioneer. Something was going wrong. My girlfriend and I split up, and I lost heart and went home to Manchester. And I was still active in the congregation, still doing public talks, a visiting speaker on a Sunday in congregations round and about. And then one Thursday evening, straight after the meeting, my friend came up to me and he said to me, "Do you actually believe any of this?" And without thinking, as if out of the blue, I just said, "No." And both of us walked out of the Kingdom Hall that evening. And Richard went back and took a different route out, but that was it. That was the end for me.
What
Out
year
of the
was
blue,
this?
it had just fallen in.
Oh, that's insane. Around what year was this?
Sorry?
What year was this?
Oh
Do you
gosh,
remember?
that was a bit way back in the mid-60s.
Okay, because I was going to say, was it in the 70s because of the whole 1975 situation that happened? Okay, so this was the mid 60s. You were already, you regular pioneered, special pioneered, then
Yeah.
just was living your life as a single young man in your 20s. This happened at the Kingdom Hall, and then you just stopped going cold turkey
Yeah.
to the meetings?
Yes, I just realized that I didn't actually believe it.
Wow.
I had never consciously thought of that at all until that moment. But
Wow.
all this this reading and thinking beyond what we were supposed to be doing, it had all, I suppose, in the back of my mind, it had built up, and I suddenly realized that Thursday evening that I had a pretty strong case against the Watchtower movement, and it fell apart for me.
So I'm so curious, what was your life like after that? And your mom was still a witness, your sisters were witnesses. Were you living by yourself at the time? Were
No, I
you
was living with my parents and that. My dad, who was not a witness, and my grandmother, his mother, she was with us. So there was my mother, who was a very devout witness, and my younger sister, who at that time would be about 10 or so. I stayed at home. Yes, things were awkward, especially when just a few weeks after I'd walked out, I was disfellowshipped. It became very difficult. I didn't want to move out of the family home right away because I didn't want to make a break for the sake of my father and my grandma, who were not witnesses. So I stayed for, turned out to be quite a while. And things were difficult. Relationship with mother was tricky, very difficult. And then I went to university and read philosophy at Lancaster and loved it. It was super. Still kept in touch with home and had a fairly grudging welcome from mother, but not always grudging. Sometimes you'd be quite decent, open and nice and good. And so it went on for a while. And after I'd graduated, we continued. But then, of course, eventually, I knew that the big split with mother was going to come because of the way I was thinking, for one thing, mainly. Because after I'd graduated and I was living, about an hour's journey from my parents' home, I could very easily, carry on with my own life and not make a big issue of it. Except that I wanted a religious, spiritual dimension to my life. I was not by any means the doctrinaire fundamentalist believer. By that time, had developed a very much different sort of spirituality. And then one evening, out of the blue, again, out of the blue, yes, I realized that I had to make the break. My father had died. My grandma had died. And I knew that this was the time when Mother was going to say, there's no need for you to visit any longer. And I guess I made it easy for them, because I had come into the Methodist church and wanted to offer as a candidate for the ministry. And so I did. Sooner or later, I had to tell my mother. I had told my father about this just shortly before he died, not knowing what his reaction would be. But the wonderful thing about that, which makes me so pleased that I told him about it at that stage, was that he was so very supportive. And so when he'd gone, I knew that I was going forward into ministry with his blessing. But what do I tell my mother? And things had become fairly difficult visiting, because Mother would give a grudging welcome, which could become less and less of a welcome, depending not on me, but if it had a particularly upbuilding assembly or something, Mother would return thoroughly bad-tempered. It was so wonderful. She was bad-tempered with all these unbelievers. And I copped it, of course. I'd arranged to go and see her, tell her that my news, but no, I couldn't. So I wrote a letter to say that I had been accepted as a candidate for the ministry, and I was going to be moving to Cambridge for pre-ordination studies. And Mother wrote back saying, that's it then. Don't want to see you anymore. And my sisters, my older sister, my younger sister, both wrote the same thing. Because of this terrible thing I was doing, I was no longer one of the family. I had turned my back on the family. So they told me, and they didn't want to know me.
How old were you at this time?
Oh, I was into my mid-30s by that time.
Still not married? You never got married?
No, didn't. That was the big bonus of making that final break and coming into ministry as I wanted to, and being in Cambridge. And single man, touching 40 in Cambridge. A friend fixed up a blind date for me with someone, and we hit it off right from the start. While I was in theological college in Cambridge, I met Maggie, my wife, and I think she's out walking with the dog at the moment. And we got married shortly before I was ordained. And we have a son, Ben, who has never been involved with the witnesses. Thank goodness. And he's a wonderful guy, living and working in Spain.
Very cool. So you became ordained as a minister. So what sect was the religion that you were a minister in? I'm not really familiar with the verbiage of how to talk about different churches and religions. So
Right.
what religion was it? And was it like a non-denominational church? Was it Christian? Was it Catholic?
It was Methodist. Methodist, Christian church, mainstream church. I remember early on when I was sort of exploring the possibility of entering the ministry, I had a conversation with a guy who was at that time General Secretary of the Division of Ministries. He was the guy in general oversight of the committees that looked after the everything to do with ministry and selection of candidates, training and so forth. Lovely conversation with him, because there was something very important to me that I had to be clear about. And equally for him, because here I was, this guy who had been brought up as a Jehovah's Witness, wandered into the church, as it were, after several years away from religion, and wanted to be a minister. This guy's he's going to have all sorts of questions. But during the course of our conversation, what I said to him was that two things. One thing was, I felt it was important for the church to be broad, to be accommodating of the whole range of Christian belief. The other thing, bringing that down to the personal level, I said that for me, it was very important always to be asking questions, exploring what we believe. And I believed very firmly that this business of exploring, questioning, doubting, resolving doubts, saying, yes, I do believe this, no, I don't believe that. It should go on the whole of your lifetime. It's not something that you do right at the beginning and say, right, this is the doctrinal package which I accept. From now on, that's it, all done. I said, no, I need the freedom to think that if I come to doubt something or disbelieve something, which I presently believe, I don't then have to go off and find some other group that believes all and everything that I believe. I want room to grow, to continue to ask. And this guy, he smiled, he said, yes, that's right, that's good.
I love that you said that, because I think it's important to know that we are, like you said, we're constantly changing, or we're constantly growing. And the fact that you just said it's important to always ask yourself these questions, instead of just like, this is my belief today and it's going to be my belief until the day I die, because it's unfair to us to believe something blindly when something is shown
Absolutely.
to us that makes us question something that we have believed in the past. So why not go inside and ask yourself, is this something I still believe in? Is this something that still rings true to me? Who cares what everyone else believes in? It's about you. You
Yeah.
ultimately make your own and create your own life. So yeah, thank you so much for bringing that out. So, okay, so, and then going back to your story, so here you are a minister,
Yeah.
married, and you have a son,
Yes.
and this is bringing you now into your mid 40s.
Yes.
Your mom and your sisters,
Yeah.
where are they in the picture, and are they still not speaking to you? Because at this time, it's been around 20 years.
Yeah.
You said your dad passed, your grandmother passed. So walk me through that, and what was that like for you? Like, you got married, you had a son. Did you reach out to your mom and your sisters? What was the situation around that?
Yeah, I'd broken completely with, well, no, they'd broken completely with me. I wrote to mother regularly, but she never replied, except, there was an exception. When I wrote to her to say that Maggie and I had got together and we were going to get married, she actually replied, this was while I was still in theological college, she replied and said she would like to meet her. And I thought, oh, wow, has something changed? Is there a possibility that mother might be possibly breaking free? So we drove up from Cambridge to Manchester to stop overnight with my mother. And it was fairly tense, I think. But then on the morning when we were getting ready to return to Cambridge, something very, very hurtful was, mother said to us both, you realize, of course, this can never happen again. And I realized at that moment that she'd actually had to ask, or felt that she had to ask permission from the elders to allow me to go back there and introduce Maggie. You can imagine how Maggie felt about that. What, never come across this sort of thing at all. How on earth can people behave like this? So, and that was it. That was it.
That was the last time you really saw your mom?
Yeah.
Okay, and then how old were you when she passed?
She died while I was in my final appointment as a minister before retiring. Ben, our son, was 18 at the time. This was what, 2006. Ben was 18, he'd never met her. Maggie and I went to her funeral in Manchester in the Kingdom Hall. I'm not sure why I would, I felt I should. I was very, very nervous because I didn't know how they were going to treat us. I didn't mind for my own sake. If they want to be stupid and say, no, you can't come in. But I was worried about Maggie. But amazingly, the folk at the Kingdom Hall at Mother's funeral were very, very gracious. The elder who took it did a splendid job. I have to give him credit for that. I didn't know who he was while he was talking. Discovered afterwards that he was a guy I'd known as a teenager. He was very gracious, but the curious thing about this, was that there seemed to be two different groups in that Kingdom Hall. There were those who were dressed very, very formally. Grey suits, collars and ties and all that sort of thing. None of whom spoke to me. And then there were the others dressed less formally, who did speak, some of whom remembered me and, oh, hi, how are you? And good to see you. My older sister was part of that group, and I have to give her credit for that. My younger sister, if anyone had been an observer there, they would not have known that she was any relation of mine. Just ignored them. So in one way it was very tough. In another way, it was surprisingly good. But that was it. My sister died, nearly 4 years ago. I didn't attend her funeral. There's no way I was going to go into her Kingdom Hall and have to be introduced as her brother. Oh, I didn't know she had a brother. Tell us about yourself. Well, I'm a Methodist minister. You can't do it. Can't do it.
Oh, and what, I take it you and your younger sister never really spoke. So when was the last time you had a conversation with her?
With my younger sister, the last time I spoke with her was, it's all death and dying, this was at my father's funeral. Which was,
you were in your 20s.
1982, Dad died.
1982, wow.
And that's when, yeah, her son was about 2 at the time, maybe a little younger. Okay. His baby sister had just been born. Never spoken to either of those again. Never spoken to my sister since then. I'm not even sure where she's living.
Oh.
Somewhere in Yorkshire, I think, but I don't know.
Okay, and at your mom's funeral, you said she didn't even really pay you any attention. You said people wouldn't even know that you guys were siblings.
No one would have realized that she was my sister. No.
And your son, Ben, has he ever been curious to meet your sister or have a conversation with your mom before he passed? I mean, I know you said he was 18.
No. They were simply not part of his life. Maggie's parents were super. They were lovely people. Yeah. But no, my mother, my sisters, no, they were just folk I used to know.
Wow.
And I wouldn't want them to have been involved with him as a youngster. I know how divisive, how they can be.
I totally understand. So tell me about Maggie and her family. Did they welcome you with warm, open arms because you really didn't have a family?
They were lovely. I remember Maggie's mom, Joyce, when I first got to know them, and she heard about my mother. She was just baffled that anyone could be like this. How can a mother treat her son like this? And she said to me, I didn't know how to take it at the time. She said to me, well, from now on, I'll be your mum.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, oh, no, please, no. But yet Yes, I did come to look upon her as a
That's
sort of
beautiful.
we had a good relationship. We sparked off fun from each other. Soon as Joyce walked into the room when they were visiting, she and I would be cracking jokes. She was lovely.
What a beautiful story. And so your life as a minister, how would you compare that life in your 30s and 40s compared to your life as a regular, devout, and special pioneer growing up in your late teens and early 20s? How would you compare the two? Because you were very spiritual, quote unquote, and very active in the religion in both places. So if you can just talk about like the difference, how you felt mentally and where you were at.
Yeah, it's a fascinating question. As a witness, the focus would be on teaching doctrine, so sort of prizing out the doctrines from between the lines of scripture. I think that's one way to put it. Whereas as a Methodist minister, I was more interested to look at the stories and see, well, what do we make of them? Just let's respond to the stories. And I remember a comment from one of the members of one of my churches just shortly before I retired. I'd been preaching on one of the parables of Jesus. And the approach I took, one that I frequently took, was to simply try and get people to visualize the situation. Here's this guy coming along, preaching, he's telling stories. Imagine you're part of the crowd. Well, what do you make of it? Never mind, do you believe it? Those folk over there, they believe it. Imagine you're on the edge of it. What do you make of this character? He's told this. And one of the members of the congregation afterwards, thanking me for my reflections on this parable, she said, because you're a bit of a storyteller yourself, aren't you? I grinned. I said, yes, well, you know me. I don't preach a sermon, I just tell the stories. And that summed it up. Never did preach sermons. I told stories.
I think
my approach to scripture.
That's beautiful. And I can totally see what you were talking about. Like as a Jehovah's Witness, we said this is how it is, and we just kind of gave a whole package, versus you as a Methodist minister, it was kind of like allowing the other person to think for themselves and to create whatever scenario and story they wanted to make of it and mean of it themselves. So interesting and fascinating. I have not talked to a priest on my channel, so this is super cool. I think too, when people think of an ordained minister, I think they think about a certain kind of person. And I love the fact that for me, when it comes to talking the way you did, it's not even a religious base. It's like you said, like it's a storyteller, and the curiosity that you're inviting people to question and to get curious about what they believe goes back to what we were talking about before, where it's like constantly asking yourself, is this right for me? Is this true for me? Do I still believe this? Just constantly, again, the critical thinking that we weren't allowed to have in the organization, which is of the most important, just being a human and to exist as our most authentic selves and to connect with our higher self, higher power, and our mission on this planet. And going back to your family and your son, you said you did mention that your son is living in Spain right now. So
Yeah.
what did he move out to Spain recently? What is he doing in Spain?
He's a teacher. He moved out there straight after graduating from university. He he read English and linguistics in Glasgow University, and then he moved out to Spain as a teacher, and he's been there 10 years or so now.
Wow. And what does he think of your life as a Jehovah's Witness?
Oh, he thinks I must have been mad.
What a great story. I absolutely loved it, Robert. I feel like it's come full circle. And is there anything that you feel like you missed out? Your story was such a beautiful one, and I love that you wrote a book. So maybe we can put a link in the description where people could find your book. That would be great after I come up with one on this video. Do you feel like there's anything that you missed out that you want to add to this interview and say to people?
I don't think so. There's always lots more, but I think that's probably about it. Naturally, follows on, I suppose, from the aspect of my story that I've been telling. What I've been engaged in mostly since retiring has been writing. I'm first and foremost a novelist, I think. I'll give you links to all the stuff. There's 2 novels there, which are my Gilead novels, which are directly about breaking away from a religious cult, based very much on the witnesses, that one. But it's not all. It's not all that. My other 2 novels are those 2. Jehovah's Witnesses do get a walk-on part in that one. Nothing at all in this one. That's my favorite of all my novels.
So cool. I love the fact that you've been writing so much into your retirement. Can I ask, how old are you? I know it's something I should be asking, but I'm
yeah,
asking.
I'm an old geezer. Yeah, I'm 78.
Wow, very, very cool. And the fact that you're writing these novels right now, it's so inspiring to hear someone like you that has had such a full life to be able to write your stories. So you have 4 novels.
Yeah, there's other stuff there. That one is, I suppose, that sums up the position where I am now. It's my approach to scripture and belief, and
isn't that the adult version of my book of Bible stories from back in the day? Stories from the Bible. Yeah. I was just talking to a client yesterday about that yellow book, my book of Bible stories, and how inappropriate it was for kids. The fact that we were getting read, like at least in my era, I'm 43. So back in the 80s, when our parents or people who were studying with us was reading from my book of Bible stories, they were showing us these pictures of Armageddon, hell falling from the sky. There was lava, and there were people literally dying in like fire. And you are reading the story to a 6, 5, 4-year-old child.
Yeah.
Terrified. And
Yes,
and here people are in their 40s and 50s, like I said, my generation, and they still have nightmares about that
yeah,
my book, a Bible story book.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, and I was just joking with you because your book is entitled Stories from the Scriptures, which is kind of a similar title to my book of Bible stories, but like a more appropriate. And I'm sure your book.
It's yeah, yes. The the question at the sort of heart of my approach is we should always ask what sort of situation would give rise to a story like this? What might have been going on? What might have been going on to prompt people to tell these tales? And then you think about how stories catch on, and someone will repeat one and alter it a bit and put it into a different context. You can see all that going on in the Bible, with the Bible stories. If only we will approach it asking, yeah, so why did they tell these stories?
And we take the religious connotation away and just leave it as a story instead of just coming up with this fixation of it has to be religious or has to be some higher power behind it. So yeah, I really
Absolutely.
love this. Well, thank you so much, Robert, for this fascinating story. I really appreciate it. I think there's so much wisdom in knowledge and inspiration in your story, and I think a lot of people will appreciate it. I definitely do. So thank you again, Robert, for coming to my channel, and thank you for watching this interview with Robert.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk. It's been good talking with you, Vivian.
Same.